Somewhere in America right now, a house is being swallowed by weeds while nobody notices, and an entire town is quietly disappearing from the map without a single headline. Not because of war, not because of famine, but because of an economic collapse so slow, so invisible, that most Americans don't even know it's happening in their own backyard. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how 5 different corners of the United States fell into the same trap, and whether any of them can still climb out. If you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, stick around, because it only gets stranger from here. Start in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, where thick forests and rolling ridgelines hide something far darker than scenery. Drive through certain counties here and the silence hits you first. Boarded storefronts, collapsed porches, roads that lead to nowhere in particular, just more emptiness. There's no skyline, no construction cranes, no hum of ambition. Just isolation, wedged between mountains that cut these communities off from the rest of the country's economic bloodstream. The numbers confirm what your eyes already suspect. In counties like Owsley and Wolf, poverty rates blow past 35%, more than double the national average, while median household income barely scratches $25,000 a year, compared to roughly $75,000 nationwide. The cause traces back to a single collapsing industry: coal. For generations, mining kept these valleys alive. Then, between 2008 and 2020, coal production in Kentucky cratered by nearly 60%, wiping out tens of thousands of jobs with nothing built to replace them. Geography made it worse. Investors don't chase opportunities buried inside remote valleys with no highways or airports nearby. So the young left, chasing something better elsewhere, and the ones who stayed inherited a poverty passed down like a family heirloom. A few sparks of reinvention exist now: outdoor tourism, solar energy pilot projects, retraining programs, but decades of decline don't heal from a handful of scattered efforts. And Kentucky is only the beginning. Head south now, into Alabama, a state wrapped in dense history but haunted by inequality that refuses to fade. While cities like Birmingham and Huntsville hum with modern energy, vast rural stretches of the state are suffocating in slow motion. Abandoned fields stretch for miles. Storefront signs haven't changed in 30 years. Roads crack and crumble on the way to towns where basic public services barely function. The gap between these forgotten counties and Alabama's urban centers isn't subtle, it's staggering. In places like Wilcox and Perry counties, poverty rates climb above 30%, and household income in some rural pockets doesn't even reach $28,000 a year. More than 1 in 5 residents depends on federal food assistance just to eat. This didn't happen overnight. For decades, the local economy leaned almost entirely on agriculture and a handful of light industries, both of which slowly withered under a lack of investment and an exodus of skilled workers chasing jobs in other states. Layer on top of that a legacy of historic inequality still shaping who gets access to resources, and you get schools stripped of funding, hospitals stretched too thin, and opportunity treated like a rumor rather than a reality. For countless young people here, leaving Alabama isn't a choice, it's survival. But here's where things take an unexpected turn, because the next city on this list looks nothing like poverty on the surface. Houston, the 4th largest city in America. Oil money, a space center, glittering skyscrapers stacked against the Texas sky. Everything about it screams success. But drive just a few miles from downtown and the illusion cracks wide open. Crumbling houses line the streets. Vacant lots sit between developments like missing teeth. Storefronts have their shutters down, some for months at a time. When night falls, the transformation gets even more unsettling. Beneath certain highway overpasses, homeless encampments stretch for hundreds of yards. Residents describe drug activity and street violence as part of daily life, and as darkness creeps in, entire blocks empty out. Behind Houston's booming reputation hides a brutal statistic. Roughly 20% of the city's population lives below the federal poverty line, and in certain northern and southwestern neighborhoods, that number rockets past 35%. Meanwhile, rents have surged more than 40% in under a decade. Houston keeps attracting corporations and capital, but that growth doesn't trickle down. Restaurant workers, warehouse staff, construction crews, the people keeping the city running are priced out of the very city they build. Thousands of households now hand over more than half their income just to keep a roof overhead. Houston is thriving and Houston is drowning, both at once. And that contradiction is only the start of what's coming next. Follow the Mississippi River now to Vicksburg, a town that once decided the outcome of a war and has been living in its shadow ever since. This was the site of a legendary Civil War siege, a place soaked in monuments and memory. But walk its streets today, and the past is louder than the present. Shuttered windows, cracked pavement sprouting weeds, entire buildings left to rot, with no one left to claim them. Even the tourist district, the one flicker of activity, can't hide the decay surrounding it. Locals speak openly about how hard it is to find steady, decently paid work. The young leave the moment they get the chance. Those who remain patch together part-time jobs, unstable gigs, and public assistance just to get by. Mississippi is the poorest state in the entire country, and Vicksburg wears that title in plain sight. Poverty here tops 30%, more than double the national rate, while median household income sits below $32,000 a year. Unemployment stays stubbornly high, crossing 10% in certain sectors. And where economic desperation festers, crime and addiction follow close behind, straining a police force that simply doesn't have the resources to keep up. River trade, light manufacturing, agriculture, all the industries that once sustained this region have faded without anything stepping in to replace them, trapping Vicksburg in a loop that scattered recovery efforts haven't managed to break. Now for the collapse that might be the most jaw-dropping of them all. Picture a city so powerful it once pulled in workers from across the entire nation. That was Cleveland. Steel mills, automobile plants, shipyards along Lake Erie, all roaring at full capacity. Today, those same streets tell a different story. Collapsed factory roofs, warehouses boarded shut, entire blocks of houses condemned, some rows with 3 or 4 out of every 10 homes standing empty. This isn't exaggeration, it's simple math. Cleveland has lost more than half its population since the 1950s, plunging from 900,000 residents to under 370,000. That kind of population freefall triggers a brutal chain reaction. Fewer residents means less tax revenue, which means fewer services, crumbling infrastructure, and even less reason for anyone new to move in. Cleveland's statistics rank among the bleakest of any major American city. Poverty consistently exceeds 30%, regularly landing it among the 5 poorest big cities in the nation. In neighborhoods like Huff, more than 40% of households live below the federal poverty line, and vacant housing sits above 15% citywide. The root cause traces back to the 1970s, when factories began closing in waves as companies chased cheaper labor overseas, erasing tens of thousands of jobs faster than emerging industries like healthcare or technology could absorb them. Cleveland is fighting back, investing in medical research, cultivating a growing arts scene, funding pockets of urban renewal. Real progress, but for the neighborhoods hit hardest, that transformation still feels miles away. And once you step back and look at all 5 of these places side by side, a chilling pattern emerges. From the mountains of Kentucky to the shores of Lake Erie, from the Mississippi Delta to Houston's outer edges, these places don't share a location, but they share a wound. Vanishing jobs sit at the center of every single story. Mines closed in Kentucky, factories shut down in Cleveland, Alabama, and Vicksburg. Whole sectors of local economy withered without anything rising to take their place. Houston tells a slightly different version. Growth actually happened there, but it widened the gap instead of closing it. The result across all 5 regions is the same. Millions of Americans left stranded without viable work in places that simply had nothing left to offer them. Globalization poured gasoline on the fire. Starting in the 1980s, countless American companies shifted production overseas, chasing cheaper labor, a shift accelerated by successive trade deals that hollowed out entire industrial regions and left communities with no safety net. Automation kept the wound open. Even where factories survived, robots and software quietly erased jobs by the thousands. And the positions that vanished first were the ones that had sustained entire working-class communities. Repetitive, physical, accessible without a college degree. Then came the brain drain. Educated young people leave for the cities the moment they're able to, taking their skills, their energy, and their future tax dollars with them, leaving behind aging populations with shrinking resources to fund basic public services. Geographic isolation locks the trap shut. In a country built around mobility, being far from highways, airports, and centers of decision-making means being invisible to investors. And all these pressures don't just coexist, they feed each other, fueling opioid addiction that has killed over 500,000 Americans in 20 years, along with declining public health, rising crime, and fractured families, each one making genuine economic recovery even harder to spark. So where does that leave these places? Without sustained, deliberate intervention, some of these communities could sink even deeper over the coming decades. Depopulation would likely accelerate first. As young residents keep leaving, some towns risk losing the critical mass of people needed to sustain schools, hospitals, transit, and local businesses, triggering what urban planners grimly call the shrinking city, a place that shrinks until it can no longer sustain itself. Social crises would likely intensify right alongside it. In regions where poverty is already tangled up with addiction, chronic unemployment, and fractured families, stagnation doesn't mean staying still, it means sliding backward. Research shows that for every point unemployment climbs, overdose deaths spike sharply in rural areas. Housing becomes its own crisis. In places like Cleveland and Vicksburg, abandoned houses aren't just an eyesore, they drain municipal resources needed for monitoring, upkeep, or demolition. And the more people leave, the heavier that burden gets. Zoom out far enough, and the consequences stop being local. Vast pockets of economic exclusion at the heart of the country fuel political tension, erode trust in institutions, and chip away at national unity. And the rise of extremism in some of these very regions traces directly back to a shared feeling of abandonment. This isn't just an economic question anymore. It's a question of whether these places can still offer a future to the children born there, or whether they'll keep losing residents, services, and purpose one quiet year at a time. But here's the answer to the question we opened with. Can any of this actually be reversed? Yes, but only under one condition. Solutions that are durable, tailored to local realities, and backed by long-term political commitment instead of short-term publicity stunts. Across the country, proof already exists that turnarounds are possible. One of the clearest paths forward is attracting new employers, and several former industrial cities have already pulled it off by drawing in renewable energy, logistics, and tech companies. Pittsburgh, once the poster child for deindustrialization, now stands as one of the most cited comebacks in the country, largely thanks to research institutions and tech firms setting up shop there. Education plays an equally central role. In regions where skill levels have stayed structurally low, targeted training programs can rewrite the trajectory of an entire generation. And retraining programs built for former miners and factory workers have already produced measurable results in several states. Reliable broadband remains desperately scarce across rural Kentucky and Alabama, choking off remote work and local entrepreneurship before they can even start. And modernizing roads, water systems, and public infrastructure is a prerequisite for any real comeback. Tourism offers a genuine opportunity too, for places like Vicksburg with its powerful historical legacy, or eastern Kentucky with its untapped Appalachian landscapes, provided the investment goes into building real infrastructure and a coherent visitor experience. Social problems can't be treated as an afterthought either. Without stronger healthcare systems, serious addiction treatment programs, and support for struggling families, every economic recovery effort risks being undermined by a population too worn down to benefit from it. There's no magic formula here. These wounds took decades to form, and healing them will take just as long. But the recent history of several American cities proves that with the right resources, a coherent strategy, and real sailing power, this spiral can be broken. Whether these places get that chance depends entirely on whether the country decides not to let them vanish in silence. If this hit you the way it hit me, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a comment telling me which of these 5 places shocked you the most, and go watch the video linked right here to see what happens when an entire industry disappears overnight.